It's hard to believe, but at 22 years old, Olivia Bee isn't considered a young photographer anymore. When she was 11 years old, she accidentally wound up in a photography class at her middle school and began making pictures of herself and her friends, posting them to Flickr. And by 15, she was off shooting her first commercial advertising assignment. So in between high school classes, she kept up her work and did more opportunities and more exhibits and more assignments and fame. And by the age of 17, she'd photographed the cover for the New York Times Magazine. Wunderkind, phenom, virtuoso. Her youth, documented all through those years in photographs, is a work of fiction and fact, represented in her first book titled Kids in Love, and recently published by Aperture. It's the diary of a beautiful youth, exploring a world of wonder and love, filled with mystery and emotion, all the characteristics of her current work, and one would imagine her future. Please welcome Olivia Bee.
Hi. Thank you. It started with pinholes of me at school, pictures where love and peace were spelled out in Cheerios next to my face. All this can be found on Flickr still, by the way. If you're ever interested, I hope you're not. Really crappy digital photos of me surrounded by purple flowers, and photos of my washed out face that I hoped would attract other 7th grade awkward children to kiss me. And I started posting these on the internet. Putting together an archive of work and having it live somewhere besides the yellow envelope I kept my negatives in, which was totally sketchy. I don't know why we did that in middle school. This release of the pictures from myself was a very important part of my process, and still is a very important part of my process, letting the work have a life of its own. Throughout the rest of middle school, I took hundreds of pictures of myself. Most of them are bad. Most of them are bad. But some of them start to talk about the things that Kids in Love embodies. I took a lot of pictures of my little brother, who is a prominent character in the book. I took a lot of pictures of my home environment. I started to talk about relationships and interactions between people and interactions between people and their environment. Mostly pictures of myself in like really dirty, gross middle school clothes or vintage prom dresses I scoured from Goodwill, often in a landscape where I look subtly lost but a little bit confident, in beautiful environments, interacting with nature or with a piece of home from the background. Looking back, I think I was starting to defend my universe, but I wasn't really thinking about any of this at all. I really didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to use a camera correctly. I still kind of don't. Kinda. It's my job, but I believe that as visual people, sometimes when we start to really feel something, it starts with really seeing it. Oftentimes I think aesthetics and things that we naturally gravitate towards are the gateway to this whole emotional portrayal of what we're aiming to capture and experience, but we are seduced by how we might think it's pretty. I get this question a lot, which is, why do all your pictures take place in a forest? Why so much green? Which I guess now that I spend a lot of my time in big concrete cities, I better understand this question, but in the beginning when I was first getting interviewed about the repetition of nature in my imagery, it seemed so silly, like duh, I'm from Oregon and shooting outside was just kind of a no-brainer. I thought trees were a neutral because the trees, that's just like where I was, the trees were my studio. And so I photographed myself outside with trees, with my environment a lot. Sometimes just trees. This is during the only huge snowstorm we've ever had in Portland. This is kind of when the first chapter in my book, Enveloped in a Dream, started to form, but totally unknown to me. All I knew was that I was obsessed with taking pictures of the world I lived in, the real memories and the ones that I was imagining. This especially extended itself towards photographing me and my best friend Lily. Her and I lived in our own universe. We had been best friends since she was born. We literally spent every day together. We would walk from her house to my house, from her house to my house, eat Parmesan cheese in between, and ride our bikes from her dad's house to her mom's house. We would spend all day at the beach. We would go hiking. It was like the dream best friendship. We would dress up in royal gowns and go walk the dog. We would ride our bikes in Western wear and pretend we were cowboys, but just to get ice cream from the corner store. We would subconsciously come up with these really elaborate narratives that we didn't even realize we were writing because we were just living them. Every day was a subconscious story, and this made every day really, really magical. I loved every moment. Lying in the park, looking at the stars was magical. Double exposing my face on top of flowers is how I felt. The way the wind flew in Lily's red hair was the essence of summer to me. Sneaking away at the beach to find cell service to call our boyfriends was an epic tale and kind of a pathetic one. But everything was special and everything was worth it in my life story. My best friend and I created the subconscious magical universe, and I just had to keep a piece of it, so I photographed it. All of it. I was also experimenting with a lot of different cameras. I never got attached to one in particular. My mother let me use her Pentax K1000, which is the one that she took all of the photos in Lebanon on, and so it was like a nice family heirloom to have. I had a digital camera that I could put analog lenses on. I used disposable cameras, Holgas, even though I think those things still suck. Who can put down a Holga? Instant cameras, pinholes, cameras I borrowed from school that barely worked, cameras that I found at Goodwill that barely worked, cameras I owned that I knew barely worked. I was never very precious about cameras because it was never and still isn't ever really about the picture. It's about the feeling that this picture successfully captured or evoked in the viewer, and I'm always the first viewer. So it was whatever touched me, and I had to really feel it. I couldn't really pinpoint this back then, but I never really wanted my photographs to feel like photographs. I thought that was kind of boring. I wanted them to feel like something that lent itself to a cross between a Renaissance painting, visceral music, spilt watercolors, a diary entry, and a film still. Maybe that's why all my pictures are out of focus. Sorry, past, present, and future clients. That's like the number one thing when I work. They're like, this is beautiful, but can it be in focus? I view my photographs as postcards from my universe. Enveloped in a Dream was a first book of postcards from my brain. And I do think that I realized that this was a chapter, but more of a chapter of my life. I could see all the images I had uploaded to Flickr on the screen in a grid, and I noticed that they had a lot of compositional similarities and a lot of visual patterns that were going on. My whites were very blue, my greens were very rich, there was a lot of symmetry, maybe too much symmetry, and a lot of motifs started popping up. Lots of hands, trees, eyes, limbs all over the place, things that like to glow from the inside. Little tiny houses in the background, rabbits, flowers, silhouettes and secretive imagery. Everything was blurry most of the time. I only liked taking pictures when there was like barely any light. I liked grain. I look back on the pictures from this time, and what I think I wanted my pictures to depict was a narrative American dreamscape from the perspective of me, the teenage girl, but to be a technically bad photo so that it could be something more. The two projects in the book bled into one another in about 2010. That's the overlap year. It's the year that I started to bring this inside universe that I had created with my best friend to the outside world. The inside universe is what's photographed and enveloped in a dream, and bringing this to the outside is what was depicted in Kids in Love. There's a lot of firsts in the second chapter, Kids in Love. This was the first day I ever had sex. A lot of the kids in the book are partying for the first time, sneaking out for the first time, going on adventures, like grabbing their lives for the first time. Everything was always magical because we had butterflies before we did it and adrenaline pumping while it was going on. My first real relationship is depicted in this, the depiction of my heart when I destroyed it. My roommate who I fell in love with that was so bad for me before my boyfriend and I even broke up. When we were staying up well past noon the next day, clinging on to the night before in Paris or Oregon or LA or wherever I was. Everything was documented. And I still didn't really know that I was shooting for a book. I didn't even know that I was shooting for anything, honestly. I just knew what I liked to photograph. I knew when a moment was worth it because I just felt it, or the basketball was right there. And I used my beauty seeking and recognition to help make those moments very seductive, and my visual, beautiful, mistake-ridden vocabulary to help show the emotion in that moment. And there's this other thing, which is that I started living like a character in my own movie. I gravitated towards universal experiences that others could paint themselves in, or the memories that we wished we had. And then I painted myself in those situations, but subconsciously. I didn't know what I was doing. I was really interested in the idea of the American high school experience, and all of the things that made that feel very applicable to a lot of people, but personal to you at the same time. I always wanted to live a very colorful life and document it. This photograph is called "Whose House Is This?" because I still don't know. I also don't know those people. This is actually the only photograph in the whole book where I don't know who the people are at all. And I hope someday that they find me and don't try to sue me, and are glad that they're in the book, because this has been I love this picture so much. This lust for adventure and for extremes and embracing my own spectrum of emotions, and this in combination with me needing to make stuff all the time, resulted in the work Kids in Love. Kids in Love is about seeing yourself in an adventure, and maybe it's an emotional adventure. It might be a positive one, it might be a devastating one, but in this book, even when you feel bad, it feels kind of good. Just really embracing those extremes. And maybe it didn't even happen to you, but it feels like it did. I wanted it to feel like a modern version of all these classic high school films, but painted and bathed in color that made it timeless and highlighting emotions that were a little too real. Towards the end of high school, I knew that I was doing something with all these pictures. I knew I was working towards something of them together. As a whole, in some way. And I had already started doing commissioned work, which is a whole other ordeal, not ideal, whatever. But I kept taking pictures of my life. My patterns started to grow, and I started really seeing a narrative behind the pictures of high school, because that's what I was documenting. It was a very personal photojournalism project with a romantic eye. And honestly, I loved the pictures. Showing the people who let me photograph them pictures in which they're like so integrated into their own life, and pieces of my life that we shared, that was a really special experience. And people were also relating to the work on the internet, and I feel a little bit responsible for some of the high school students who were on Flickr at the time, photographing their lives as if it were a dream. Kids in Love is a dream, but a real dream made with real events and real people. I just see it through washes of color and grain and blur and fog, but with real feelings at the core. I did a show of both chapters of the book in Madrid and in New York. Seeing the work on the wall for the first time, and seeing people respond to it away from a computer was a beautiful experience. But the next step was making a book out of it. But for this to really become a book, I needed to step away from it. The chapter had to close itself naturally. This is when I was talking about us wearing Western wear to the corner store. That's in the parking lot. And what happened for me to be able to experience this departure was I grew up a tiny bit. I'm still the youngest person on this stage, but I am the youngest person currently on this stage, and I'm not 16 anymore. I talked a little bit earlier about letting work go. And I wanted to touch on this again, because I think you have to make work that's really, really, really close to you, and you have to be so into that universe and totally think it's real, even when these events are real, but I'm in a whole romantic bubble. But then you have to remove yourself from it in order to make it applicable to an audience, and how to figure out how it can exist in the world outside of the one that you created. For me, I wanted Kids in Love to have its own life detached from my own experiences. After the shows, I was taking commissions all over the world and basically in a hotel room alone all the time. I feel very fortunate to have a lot of time alone and a lot of time in transit, because it really gets me to know what's in here, and good reflecting time. And sometimes I don't speak the language, which can be kind of beautifully isolating. And sometimes it hurts emotionally and physically. My body gets tired a lot from switching time zones. But I'm really, really thankful for it. And through all of this time alone, the book really started to shine through the way it was supposed to. And I was able to make it happen with the tremendous help of my publisher, Aperture Foundation. I can't thank you guys enough. And a funny thing about releasing Kids in Love is that I felt really crazy after it came out. When people could have it on their own, I guess is when it happened. Like, people started calling me and people started emailing me and saying that they like gave it to their daughter for their birthday, or they like it's on their kitchen table, or their kitchen table, it's a coaster, on their coffee table. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so amazing. But I started to feel like really like emotionally distraught about it, because it was something that had kept so close to me, and then I had given away in pieces. Like, I had it on the internet, and then I had it in these shows in New York and Madrid. But now that something that I held so close, it was not mine anymore. But I didn't understand why I was feeling so weird and disassociated, because I was like, oh, I need this to, I need this as part of the whole process. But then a super obvious thing dawned on me, which was that this work is about my life. And because it was so close to me, I was really mourning a chunk of my youth. And I felt like I had lost a huge part of me. But the thing is, mourning creates space for something new.